psychopathology is. What does the word paradigm mean? Some kind of a way of thinking about something, or you can say a perceptual framework, or you can say a school of thought. Those are all different ways to describe kind of a way of thinking about it. What is an array of chromosomes called? A karyotype. It's a pictorial array of chromosomes. We have 23 pair of chromosomes, one from biological mom, one from biological dad. There is a whole lot of genetic information on pairs 1 through 22. Pair 23, which determines biological sex. Scattered around our chromosomes would be our about 19,000 genes. We are talking about what we call the genetic paradigm. This is a way of understanding mental illness by studying genes and chromosomes. What I want you to know about psychological disorders is that they are polygenic in nature. The genetic paradigm has taught us, their research suggests that psychological disorders are polygenic in nature. We also know that the environment can impact the behavior of our genes. We know that the 19,000 genes we have inherited, they're not all expressed. Some of them remain dormant, some of them are expressed. Some of them remain dormant and then sometime in your 20s or 30s start expressing themselves. So what we used to think is the genes that you inherit, the ones that are activated, that's the end of the story. Now we know that some genes can be turned on or turned off based on our environment. Gene expression. So now we know there's tons of genes involved in a psychological disorder, and those genes they're dynamic. They can be turned on or turned off. We now know that traumatic events can activate or quiet certain genes. Heritability is an important topic. The extent to which variability of a mental illness in a population can be explained by genetic factors. Heritability refers to populations of people only, not individuals. You will see what we call the heritability index as we go through some of the chapters. Some mental illnesses are far more largely genetic than others. And how do we know that? Well, these researchers from the genetic paradigm, they're the ones teaching us. So their research is very narrow in scope. It looks at chromosomes, it looks at genes, it looks at how the environment can impact these genes and how these genes influence how we think and behave. Shared versus non-shared environments. You'll definitely see that on a test. As you're doing your reading on heritability, by the way, you will see a range between 0 and 1. So I gave you the example of ADHD is 0.7. Okay, the closer to 1, the more genetic. The closer to 0, the less genetic. 0.4 and above is considered very significant. So Caspi and others in 2003, make sure as you're reading this section, pay special attention to their research. They looked at child maltreatment and depression. Very, very interesting research. If you look next on your outline, it's the neuroscience paradigm. Looks at mental illnesses from the brain. We're going to look at brain anatomy, the behavior of neurotransmitters. They study parts of the brain and teach us. We're looking at an MRI here. We're looking at the inside of the right hemisphere. So this area right here, part of the frontal lobe, it's right by the orbital bone. So this is called the orbital frontal cortex. It turns out that this part of the brain is really, really important for impulse control. Do we see poor impulse control in certain mental illnesses or certain psychological disorders? ADHD, impulse control disorder. What about if someone's harming themselves? Is there some problems with impulse control there? Point is, sometimes we can look at one area of the brain and we can see a bunch of different disorders that may point to that area of the brain. What I don't want you guys to think is that a disorder is linked to a particular part of the brain. So again, this is coming out of the neuroscience paradigm. They're going to look at different structures of the brain. They're going to compare people who don't have disorders versus people who do and see if they can find any differences in the structure or the function of the brain. And then they even get down to more of a microscopic level. They can talk about neurons and if neurons are communicating, if they're releasing enough neurotransmitter, if reuptake is going on like it's supposed to. The neuroscience paradigm is also going to look at things like the HPA axis. This has to do with how much cortisol your body is releasing. Okay. Talking about how the hypothalamus, that's the H in the HPA axis, has to do with how much cortisol is released. So do you see where the neuroscience people talk about brain structure, brain function, and then they even look at hormones, neurotransmitters, and things like that. Interesting thing, a lot of really important research going on with the immune system right now. Your brain is an organ just like your heart, your kidneys, your liver. It is not exempt from processes going awry. Okay, so if our brain is inflamed because our immune system is overactive, guess what's going to happen? Our behavior is going to change pretty drastically. If you look at part 3, the cognitive behavioral paradigm, this paradigm incorporates learning principles and connects that with what we've learned about how the brain processes information, thinking, reasoning, decision-making, how our mind uses information. Cognition in general is any process that goes on in our mind, how we take in information that's encoding, how we maintain it, how we store it, how we retrieve it, how we remember it, how we perceive it. Okay. So while we don't necessarily specifically study the psychoanalytic paradigm, which is usually the Freudian paradigm, some of Freud's elements of his theories have been incorporated into this cognitive behavioral paradigm. If you look at part 4, factors that cut across all paradigms, all these different perspectives, what do we see in common with all of them? What areas do they all tend to see as important, and what areas do they study? And one of them is our emotion. How we respond, our emotions. So emotion, or what we call emotional expression, that's one of the factors that cut across all paradigms. Is a factor that is studied. Obviously, in mental illnesses, emotional disturbance is common. Another factor that cuts across, let's talk about culture. I think. Do certain cultures appreciate or not appreciate mental illness still? Do we see anything with socioeconomic status? People with very low socioeconomic status, they have a much higher rate of mental illness. Okay, so if I don't have enough money to have a place to live, a stable place to live, and I'm hungry quite a bit, and I've got 2 kids to care for, what do you think my stress level is? Super high. Okay, so I now have too much cortisol impacting my brain, which is now inflamed. Do you see where socioeconomic status is a big deal here? So poverty is a huge issue. So just because someone has a lot of money doesn't mean they're, somehow safe from developing bipolar disorder one day. Not sure at all. People with low socioeconomic status because of poverty are at a far higher risk. Do our relationships matter? The quality of our relationships matter. Healthy relationships are a factor in resiliency. Abusive relationships are harmful to all. Unresolved grief is a big deal in this interpersonal attachment. Oh, that's one of my favorite topics ever, attachment. Close emotional bond with your primary caretaker, whoever that is, mom, dad, nanny, neighbor, uncle, foster parent, whoever. So as an infant, birth to 1, actually birth to 3 is the big years for attachment, okay? A close emotional bond, if that infant and that early toddler has at least someone he or she can develop trust with, that is a factor in resiliency. Babies who have no one to attach healthy to, they are at risk for psychological disorders. So, attachment, biological or environmental? We can do a lot of great education. We can teach new parents or caretakers or foster parents or whoever it is, we can teach them how important attachment is. We can teach them how to create a secure attachment, and we can then reduce the likelihood that that infant will develop a disorder. That is something in our control. Seriously, you guys, we could do a lot with that. Okay, so attachment and interpersonal relationships and the presence or absence of mental illness is a huge topic. Okay, so secure attachments are so essential. So psychological health and well-being are at lower risk for developing a disorder one day than infants who had an insecure attachment. an eclectic school of thought or an eclectic theoretical perspective. Sometimes we use the term integrative, take from a couple of different paradigms. And the one that I want you guys to know is something called the Diathesis-stress model. So the diathesis-stress model, or sometimes it's called the diathesis-stress paradigm. Basically, researchers from this perspective say this. Look it's both biology and environment. If we're really going to have a comprehensive understanding of psychological disorders and how they develop and how they're maintained, we need to look at both biology. So diathesis has to do with your biological predisposition. So diathesis, biological predisposition. So for example, if I have a parent with bipolar 1 disorder, I don't know what my genes are, but I may be a little bit at higher risk for developing bipolar disorder than someone who doesn't have any biological parents with bipolar 1. So I'd be talking about, diathesis would be my genetic risk, or my relative risk, based on my genes, okay? So your genetic predisposition. Stress has to do with what is going on in your environment. So the researchers from the integrative paradigm, or from this diathesis-stress model, will say your genetic predisposition and how it interacts and is influenced by your environment, that gives us the most comprehensive understanding of mental illness. None of these are right or wrong. They're just different views on a very complicated topic.